as it relates to the Garifuna Holocaust and the displacement of the Garifuna nation. Um, it seems to me that the film festival is on point um, in bringing this issue to this forum. Um, because even though it is a particular issue that that affects the Garifuna community, um, historically, we have all the facts about that, disingenuous encounter, um, the Garifuna Holocaust and displacement um, has a universal message that relates to what affects immigration. Because we know that we have immigrants who are displaced from war, we have immigrants who are displaced by economics, lack of opportunity, and we have immigrants too who move by themselves because they're in love with somebody from another place. So there's some good things in immigration. Um, Good things because I was thinking, just metaphorically when I look at those monarchs in Santa Cruz, migrating from a different locale and all these beautiful colors, right? So when I look at immigrants, I'm also looking at the array, different cultures that enrich um, our experiences and things that we could share. I was also reflecting on a documentary I saw months ago called El Norte, and I wanted to just bring this to the fore. I was looking at El Norte because when people think about immigrants, some don't look at the cause, the root cause. I was looking at El Norte, and the protagonist in that documentary was being displaced because of some injustice in the community. There were these big companies who go into, small communities, and the workers are mistreated and displaced. And, and so people, generally, it seems like they always look to the north, and then when we come to the north, we also are displaced because, the cultural differences. Yesterday, we looked at Wayunagu, right, which was a documentary presented by Mr. Chris Miles, which also reflected on displacement. The protagonist in that movie felt out of place being in the north and had to go back home to feel whole again. And these things, these movements and displacement have their own psychological impact on the migrants. So I think this is what we are discussing, right? And I think all the panelists here will bring their own point of view as related to the social and psychological impact of migration. So I want to pass it on to the first speaker.
Yeah, my name is Ronnie Figueroa. I'm the vice president and co-founder of the Garifuna Heritage Foundation in Long Beach. Even though we're officially recognized in Long Beach as a 501c3, we operate in the greater Los Angeles area, and of course in major states where Garifuna are found. I have a quote that I found in one of my classes while getting my master's degree, and I couldn't help to really grab these piece of literature and share it with you. It says, Garifuna culture thrives in transnational space because language, habit, and tradition is still continues regardless of geography. And we see that in New York, especially in the Bronx, where there is drumming going on, dancing, Wanarawa dancing, the cooking of the traditional Garifuna food, and the speaking of the language above all. It's just amazing how there are Garifuna Americans born in New York and in Los Angeles who still are able to be fluent in Garifuna, which is very rare. But that's just one of the openings that I wanted to give you, just to kind of like get refocused on what we're talking about. And also being an immigrant from Guatemala and being married to a Garifuna woman, my wife has been a very active member of the community, and she was the one behind the force on trying to get GAFU to be a 501c3. So she is the founder and someone who I admire for the work that we both do in the community to try to make things better.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me into this space. It's always an honor and a privilege to be in spaces where I personally have the opportunity to share my story as a woman, a child, now a woman that was brought into this country at the age of 10. So part of your introduction spoke about displacement, right? And so specifically for me, the displacement has always been, I call it no man's land. I came here when I was 10, and up until a year and a half ago, I finally went back home after 30 years. And just this constant loss of where do I'm so glad to see that a mental health specialist is on the panel, and just this loss of not belonging. I don't legally belong in this country. I have no major connections to being back home. Even the way that back home would be Belize, and even the way that I speak, right? I'm always astonished as to when people point out the fact that I have no real detectable accent. That in and of itself is a sign of having to or choosing to assimilate and sounding this way. And like Ronnie said, having visited New York and just the rich cultural history of Garifuna, American Garifuna folks being born and still being entrenched in that. And by the way, if I didn't introduce who I am, my name is Ria. I came out about my status 3 years ago at this point, April 6, 2014. And I came out not because my stance about immigration was, oh, screw immigration. It was a bare material condition that needed to be met. I was back facing potential homelessness, being a mom to four children. I was put in a position because of my status and because of no longer being able to legally work in this country. Yes, I worked, but at some point when E-Verify came up, all these other things that got in the way that made my financial livelihood null and void, I found myself having to ask for a handout, right? So that's what led up to me sharing my situation and being forced to share exactly why it is that I needed this extra help. So I'm always open to questions. I'm open to going to more details, but I will pass along the mic.
Thank you, Ria. I'll pass on to Rosa. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. First and foremost, it's a privilege being here. Um, Again, my name is Rosie, and I'm also an immigrant that came here when I was 7, and I was born in Mexico. And you don't realize at that age what immigration is, or how it can impact you in a certain way at that age. And I do recall, I like to share a brief story. I do recall, not being able to go out to the park or not feeling safe because my dad immigrated here first, and he brought us here again when I was 7, and knowing that he was already feeling comfortable living in the United States, he wanted to take me out to the park or the market. I didn't feel safe because he already had um, said that word, immigration. We just have to be careful when we go out. But again, I didn't know, like, okay, well, how is this gonna affect me in the long run? And I do recall not isolating myself, just wanting at that age, you would think you want to go out, 7-year-old, 8-year-old wanting to go out and play. I do remember I did not want to go to school. They enrolled me in school and I left school. I got lost. I remember that story very clearly because I was scared. I was scared because we had already, unfortunately, we had already been caught once by immigration trying to come to this country where, it's supposed to be um, free of opportunities. And again, at that age, I didn't know that that had an impact on me. And yes, it was scary. And so all along I said, I am going to become a U.S. citizen and, I'm going to fight for my family, for my mom. I'm actually the youngest of six. I have four brothers and my sister. And I probably can say that I was the first one in my family who became a U.S. citizen. And now, looking back and working for LA County Department of Mental Health, I I know that it all starts with just the thought of not being able to be free and talking to people in the community. How eventually you think, well, I don't need mental health services. But if we really think about it, immigration, the whole issue in the news and everywhere you go, you hear it, you read it, and so it becomes stress. Stress becomes anxiety. Anxiety turns into maybe a physical illness already. And then this physical illness might make you lose your job or not be able to go to work because you're sick. And then something happens financially. So now you're stressed. Now you're depressed. So this turns into a more chronic depression where unfortunately or eventually you will be needing mental health services. And that is one of the reasons why we are here, and we will go more into details what we are doing as Department of Mental Health. But like I said, I never heard of mental health services. What was mental health services until I became a teenager, and I didn't realize I was suffering already from depression and isolating in the house. And again, like I said, immigration unfortunately turns into a health issue where it might be turning into a mental health, and that's where mental health services come helpful.
Thank you, Rosa. Now we go on to Bilal Morris.
Yes, I'm Bilal Morris. This is such a distinguished panel of diverse views in terms of immigration and the social and emotional impact that immigration is having or has had on people of color and immigrants in the United States, in various diasporas. I am from Belize. I'm a broadcast journalist, filmmaker, and I just want to say this film festival I'll be premiering a film for screenings called on the gang crisis that is unfolding in Belize since the largest group of black immigrants out of Belize in 1961, where Belize had its largest migration of people when the devastation of Hurricane Hattie in 1961. I was just born, I was a boy, and that was when the United States government opened up the doors for Belizeans to get visas to come to the United States as a means of helping back their families, in supporting their families and having given us support that Belize could build back itself and develop back, and it worked tremendously. We are the children of those, that immigrant group of Belizeans that have migrated out of Belize in 1961, second, third, and fourth generation immigrants that has left. Some never did go back. And what we have had since that time was following a post-immigration flow that has caused a brain drain on the country where some of the best minds left. Um, it not only had some of the best minds that left, but the impact of immigration in Belize since 1961 and the devastation during that hurricane, it created a void where many of these children in the 80s left them behind because of the continuous immigration that happened after that flow of the first immigrants. A large amount of those Belizeans continued to immigrate, and those children who were left behind turned out to be some of the very children today that have been indoctrinated into this crisis called Belize's gang crisis. The gang crisis started in 1980 with the arrival of American television and the so-called war on drugs. As we know, Belize never had television. I grew up in a society that we listened to radio, BBC, being that Belize is a British colony, and Voice of America. And so we never saw television until 1980, and it was pirated. It was pirated out of from the American satellites, and the government, the prime minister of that country, George Cadle Price, never liked television. He never wanted, he didn't like tourism. He never liked television because he foresee the damage of a society what would happen. And it changed the Belizean society overnight, its entire culture. But the main problem that it brought, the so-called war on drugs coupled with the arrival of American television, was that it created a gang culture amongst these children that was left behind where the parents migrated out of Belize, illegal immigrants, most of them being illegal immigrants, that that follow that first flow, that first generation. And today we have the gang crisis in Belize because of the impact of immigration. My wife, who sits in the audience today, she did her master's thesis called Long Distance Parents. She's a social worker, and I want to refer to her in the audience there. She has showed me a lot in terms of the flow of women, particularly the impact on women that came out to seek a better life for their children. And that master's thesis is going to be put into a book, and it's called Long Distance Parents, parents that lives abroad, and the impact that those women who had to leave their children with grandmothers and just sending money and remittances, the impact that that had. And today the impact that it had was that it has created a gang culture in Belize with those children become dysfunctional families, and it created a gang crisis that is now creating a trauma. They are terrorizing Belize City, and it has reached to the point of civil war proportions, but it's not coming out of the news. We are not hearing anything about it. Somehow the Belize government tried to pretend that Belize is just a place of flora and fauna, and where the tourist board invites people to come to see the beauty of the country. Yes, it's a beautiful country, but it's human resource. It's young black men, both Garifuna and Creole, are slaughtering each other in the streets. And it has reached to the point of civil war proportions. This is the crime rate in Belize is higher than the crime rate in Washington, D.C. And so this is my being here today is to raise an awareness about the impact, the emotional and the social impact immigration has had on the Belizean society, both in Belize and in the diaspora.
Thank you, Mr. Blau. So the forum is immigration and its emotional and social impact. And I noticed that it seems to me that economics, right? Economics has a correlation with mental um, mental stability, and the lack of economic resources contribute to mental instability. Um, we just had another person on the panel, Yvette Robin, who provides outreach from the LA city, and we'll ask you to chip in. But I want to go back to Rosa a little bit, um, because I remember when I was growing up, mental health didn't seem to have been a major occupation. We never talk about mental health in a serious manner. We always seem to want to look at the physical health of the person. Um, but how can a community or society stay abreast? And I know it's your profession. Would you encourage a community perhaps to stay abreast of the the mental health of its community? What suggestions? I know it's a kind of broad thing, and then we could ask Yvette to chip in.
Thank you. That came perfect because I do want to talk about knowing the five signs. So it's true, whether it is because due to culture or religion, we don't know what mental health is, or we don't want to ask because again right now at this point a lot of the community is afraid to even go to a medical clinic because of immigration status. And so what that is one of the points we wanted to clarify. Department of Mental Health does not share any, not one piece of information with ICE. That we just wanted to clarify that. But so LA County right now, has a campaign that it's called Change Direction. It's called Change Direction, and it's knowing the five signs. And you know, they're very simple, but again, because whether it is the barrier of culture, religion, or language, we don't want to ask, we don't want to talk about it. And so I want to share with you the five signs. The first one is personality change. And this can be whether it is your friends, family, a neighbor. It's good to be aware of these signs. So the first one is personality change. The second one is agitated, withdrawn, poor self care, and hopelessness. So again, these are simple signs for you to be aware of when it comes to family, friends, a neighbor. And so by knowing these signs, you should be you should feel comfortable approaching someone and offering them, just inspiring, saying a word of encouragement, letting them know that there is help. And that's why Department of Mental Health exists. We have a variety of services, um, whether it is someone that suffers from a high level of care to someone that suffers from low level of care, meaning outpatient. And so we want to encourage you. We left some of our these cards, the small version of these cards, for you to take home, read about it, know the signs, and just again, just spread the word and share with friends, family, and neighbors. And sorry, I'll go back to this one. Now, that one is you knowing the signs and offering help and letting them know that there is help. Now, this one is more for you and as well as the person you're trying to help. It says take care of yourself. Check in with yourself and your emotions. Engage with that person, engage with your friends, family. And look, find time during your busy work hours, school hours, to find time to relax. Take maybe 30 minutes, 20 minutes out of your day to just sit down, relax, clear your minds. And again, just knowing the five signs. Yvette, would you like to add anything?
Rosie shared a lot about the five signs. But I also want to add with Department of Mental Health, we want to decrease the stigma. A lot of people are scared. So within the community, with everything going on with the immigrants right now, just make sure you tell your loved ones, I love you. One way to decrease anxiety is to make sure you have a plan in place. We can't give legal advice, but you can share with your families or with people that you know and care about. Have a plan in place. Take the steps to be legal, to do what's legal, so that if someone is deported, they can rest assured that their family is still being taken care of. And also, not just with people being deported, just all I can say is spread the love, care, know that, share with people if they come in contact with the police, just follow what they're asking. That way, extra things do not occur that, they will not like to occur. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll ask the panelists a few more questions, and I'll turn it over to the audience for questions too. But I wanted to follow up with Brother Bilal in doing that documentary on the gang crisis in Belize. You talk about the gang mentality, right? Gang culture. It seems to me like it was an adopted attitude to being. In your findings, in your documentary, did you find perhaps another culture that was not gang culture that perhaps would be more easily adoptable by the gangs? So I'm trying to see if there's a solution or a way out.
The nature of Belize's gang problem, it's like post-migration, the effect of post-migration on children, in that it was exported out of South Central Los Angeles. With the arrival of American television in 1980s, Belizean young men start watching movies like Boys in the Hood, New Jack City, the movies that glamorize the culture. Being that they were a predominant, Belize being a predominantly black country at one time, most of these children were fascinated with the glamorization of these movies. And therefore, the movie theaters, as we used to have, used to show cowboy movies, westerns, as we used to call them, right? But when television came, those theaters had to be closed down. And therefore, television, which was American television that was pirated from the satellite, made this devastating impact in that here you have a culture, as you are asking my brother, that was there another culture that yes, there was another culture. The copying of this negative lifestyle from African American culture in South Central by looking at these movies that was made by Hollywood that had a devastating impact. As you know, subliminal messages is very, very impacting on young minds. But also another factor that played a tremendous role, as I had mentioned in the introduction of my presentation, is the so-called war on drugs. A large, as we know what happened in South Central Los Angeles with the Crips and the Bloods, with the American government using cocaine during the transnational aspect of drugs, and the whole crisis that occurred there, where that whole explosion occurred in Los Angeles, in South Central. It had a similar effect. The war on drugs had a similar effect in Belize amongst young black men, Garifuna and Creole, in that a lot of them were incorporated into the drug cartels. That the cocaine that was coming in from Colombia, Belize is very close to Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, the whole transnational aspects of drugs and the so-called war on drugs that the Reagan administration has implemented in trying to fight this flow of drugs into the United States. A lot of those young Belizean black men, Garifuna and Creole, became part of those drug cartels and are still part of those drug cartels today. It has gotten even worse. And therefore, those were the two push and pull factors that we find that created that problem. In the era of migration, of immigration, where there was a void left after those parents, those women, particularly those women, migrated out of Belize, it created that void for these young men. They didn't have no parents to lean on to, so the gang became the community. And therefore, the drugs also created a avenue for them to lust. They were lusting off these opulent lifestyles that they were seeing on in American culture. And therefore, it was such an easy and a devastating thing that occurred there. So that was the factor, the two factors that created that. It was a culture that was exported out of South Central Los Angeles into Belize via American television.
So I want just Belize is a small country. Belize City has a population about 60,000. Them being charitable, right? 60,000, and the young population is about 40%. Young, I meaning 0 to about 25 thereabout, right? So if I do the numbers, even though I teach English, um, I look at the numbers. You're looking at what a population of maybe 40,000 young people, right? And I don't know what that is equivalent to a school district in LA, but it seems like it's a small group in the city, predominantly in the city. And my worry about that problem is that it might spill over into the other districts, and not as profoundly as in Belize City, right? Um, yeah. So I just want to say that the present government has a high tourism interest. So there's a lot there's a lot of economic perhaps activity that should be happening, right? So I want to think that perhaps all is not lost because we're talking about a small population. And perhaps maybe as social workers, we might want to look at what's going on in Barbados that is far away from the US. And they're doing pretty, I don't know how they're doing, but it seems like they're doing a little better than Belize that is near to the US. But that's another issue perhaps you want to talk about. I want to come to Ria Lambe. As a female, he's talking about, this gang violence, predominantly men who are being displaced by lack of opportunities here and also in Belize. How do you sort this out? How do you, even though, the question is of being whole, but how do you sort out, how do you navigate this to find being a whole person? Or is there some problems yet?
I think the challenge for me in answering that is my world is constituted mostly of a small world, right? So first of all, when I went back home, I had so I came out April 6th about my status. After being here for 27 years undocumented, and I made my trip back home after, like I said earlier, after 30 years, on December 5th, yeah, December 17th, I was home. And one of the things that I actually did notice was this constant, so when I left back home, I was free. I was a little girl, I'm free. I'm living my free 10-year-old, 11-year-old life back home. But when I went back home, specifically in Belize City, there was this heightened fear of don't wear this, don't wear that. I had a jewelry, I had my necklace on, and my sister made it very clear to me, make sure you tuck it in. And it was just this constant heightened fear of be careful. And I'm like, I think I went back with the state of mind of a 10-year-old that I could just roam the city, and it was made very clear you can't. I know for me as a mom with a 23-year-old, 19-year-old, my 16-year-old, he's in the audience. I'm always challenged as to the idea of gangs, right, infiltrating my children. My children, unfortunately, as young black men in this country, they're dealing with their own separate set of stuff. But I clearly remember my 23-year-old sharing with me being approached by gangs and wanting to get him. It's always this constant fear of, even with my 16-year-old, checking in with him and asking him if he's being bullied, and folks from the street wanting to take him, to be part of that. I find myself from time to time grappling with, how do I protect my children? We live in the hood. I live in Leimert Park. And, I shared something on Facebook the other day that happened to me. And the question of the day was, how, you live in the hood when? And for me, my, you live in the hood when was I hopped in my car. I'm on my way to school. And, I said, well, let me double check to make sure I have all my stuff for the day. And I go to the trunk of the car, and like, I have no license plate. I'm like, oh my God, like, I have no license plate. So I walked to the front of the car in hopes that if nothing else, I have front plates, but both my plates are gone. And so that, among other things, right, is a stark reminder that I live in the hood and I'm raising young black boys. Like I said, I'm a grandmother to another male.
Him. It's not gang related at all. It's not drug related. It's just life circumstances and him trying to search for who he is as a black person. I know that I shared with Mr. Morris a quick minute of when we chat. Part of also I wondered was, I know in the 90s as a teenager, a lot of folks were sending their children back home. And I even know with me, the 2 weeks that I was back home, I had to check. I had to check my American ways. Like, ask me, I would tell you, oh no, I don't have American ways. When I went back home, I was like, I had a lot of American ways. Like, I didn't want to get in that bus to go to St. Bite. I wanted an air-conditioned bus. I'm like, I'm not about to sit in this hot-ass bus trying to go across to the village that I was born in. It was just, I had to tell myself, Ria, leave your American shenanigans back home. So I don't really fully know how to answer that question. I know for me, I was raised in the 90s, right? Late 80s, closer to the 90s. But I was raised with my cousin Cheryl. I was raised with my specific Garifuna community. My children are just not in that space where they haven't been raised with their cousins, where I was raised with my cousins. Let me take a brief moment. So that's the best way I can answer that. But let me take a brief moment to follow up with something that Miss Yvette said, right? So one of the things that I'm working with and trying to put together is a Know Your Rights workshop. Yeah, it's easy to say follow what the police says, but also as black folks, documented and undocumented, we really need to know what our rights are, and we really need to know how it is, especially as undocumented folks, how to properly handle the police, right? That means how to deal with ICE if ICE comes to your home, and how to deal with ICE if ICE was to pull you over in a car. So I think it's critically important that we have these workshops. I'm in the process of, it's hard to get bodies in these spaces. I judge no one that is undocumented and don't want to come out. Again, I didn't come out because I'm like, oh, I'm done with immigration and their shenanigans. I came out because of a basic material condition. I was forced to do it because I had to put aside that pride to make sure that my children would have a roof over their head, and in turn was able to share my story. I had to share my story. But yeah, it's critically important. Yes, follow what the police says, but we also need to know that we also have rights that we can tell the police no. We can tell them no. One of the organizations that I've partnered up with also, we have Know Your Rights. I think I may have some Know Your Right cards to be able to tear that off and hand it to a police officer. You don't have to talk to a police officer, period, point blank. I know that even the idea of being pulled over, it's an
anxiety filled type of thing. And when we're in these situations, we're not thinking in the moment, but this, along with the mental health piece, right? This is where we have to train ourselves to check our anxiety and check our stress in that moment, because we do not, under no circumstance, have to speak to a police officer, period, point blank. That's a right. And again, documented and undocumented folks need to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria. So the issue of migration or immigration, right, and its emotional social impact. Looking at the gangs from Belize going back home and taking this, migrating with another attitude and a gang attitude. I want to pose this question to Ronnie, being that you are in this space of Garifuna cultural heritage preservation. My question and my interest would be, do you find that having this cultural space, where young people find this cultural space, gives them perhaps some way out, right, from being adopting an attitude of gangs? Now, you might not know the answer for it, but I want to know if perhaps that might occupy that activity, that activity of belonging to something that you would makes you whole, mentally whole, all right, and be proud of, could be something that could be an ideal, as perhaps challenging the Hollywood, right, the Hollywood trajectory, right, so to speak. What have you found? Because I know you work a lot with young people, the culture, the music, the dances, and I've heard that usually when Garifuna people are having a party, there's less of a problem, as you know. I don't know.
Yeah, you have a very important point. Working with the Garifuna community, I want to shift it from Belize to Honduras and Guatemala because the Garifuna community, as you know, is transnational, coming from Nicaragua, Honduras with the largest number of Garifuna, and Guatemala with the smallest, and of course, Belize. Um, I have found one that when the young kids arrive from their home countries to Los Angeles or New York, having a group where they identify helps to really ease the transition from being an illegal or maybe legal immigrant into adopting and assimilating the American way. It's a lot easier. Two, we got a phone call. We get many phone calls, especially this one here that came from Eli, very top notch jail, an immigration jail in Arizona, at the border of Mexico. And it was a young Garifuna who came at the age of 16, and he was incarcerated because he tried to make it across the border from Honduras, and he got detained multiple times. And because the kid didn't want to look back and go back to Honduras, every time he got deported, he was just dumped into Mexico. So he tried again. So finally, they were able to detain this kid until he turned 18 inside the jail. And so this kid had to find resources to try to fight his way to the point that he claimed to be lesbian from the LGBTQ community. So he identified as that, so he could get the resources inside of the jail to be able to survive and not to be sent back. So I guess all of this helped. But in the meantime, as we were getting phone calls from the priest from the jail saying, Ronnie, I need you to help me. And this kid would call me and speak to me in Garifuna fluently and say, man, I need some help and get me out of here. You know, I need a sponsor. And we as a 501c3 could do the sponsoring, but then it was not just that. It's money, it's resources, and it's more than just accepting someone. So he finally gets released, and it was this family from Los Angeles, from El Salvador, who were not even black, who put up the money to bring this kid to get him released. So he was released to them. And when this kid got released, the first thing he did is call me. He said, Ronnie, I'm here, I'm free. But then he was not really free. he had a ankle bracelet, which is put on by the ICE, which is the immigration agent, to track you down. So we tried calling the different lawyers. I took them to the different agencies in Los Angeles. We did a fundraiser at 48 and Hoover, where the Garifuna community comes together on the weekends. So we did fundraise a large amount of money. We gave it to him. And so eventually, to make this long story short, he gets his papers in the mail saying that he had a work permit. And nobody was given a dime to the fact that this kid was ever going to be legal. Well, he's not legal yet, but he's able to have a window of opportunity to work in economic. Yes. So as soon as he got the paperwork, he came to me and he said, "Thank you for what you guys did," and that's part of what we do. So he moved to Texas to where his sister is living, and so that's one story. The other story in looking at the mental issues and the negativity that immigration brings, we have also to look at the good and positive things that I have seen, which is going to the Guatemalan Garifuna. A lot of the Garifuna who came from Livingston went through Belize. They picked up a lot of English there, and they were able to come to the States. So they migrated to 2 or 3 different nations before making it here. So a lot of them come to the United States, and they integrated mostly in New York. That's where 95% of the Garifuna community of Honduras and Guatemala come to live. So what I've noticed is that and this is based on an article that I read that came out on Tuesday in El Periódico from Guatemala, saying that the writer is a Spanish guy who said that the immigration in Guatemala, and the name of the article is The Guatemalan Garifuna Exodus, and he was looking at it in a very negative way, saying that people of Garifuna were abandoning their lands because of the migration, and you say that there's also the smart people and the ones that really want to get ahead, they come and they flee their nations, and they come here and they give it all to this beautiful nation, which is now my home. What we have noticed that a lot of these kids who came here at the age of 10, 19, and so on and so forth have made it. A lot of them have worked for MTA in New York, for Water and Power, and made good money, and now they are retiring in Livingston, where they have built beautiful houses, and they live good. And in no way was this writer right by saying that a lot of them are abandoning their homes and selling the land, because they're not. They're going back and they're replanting the land, and they're taking care of their children, and they live good lives. So that's the positive aspect that I wanted to mention about immigration as well.
Thank you, Ronnie. Now I want to pass it on to the audience for questions.
Um, I'm gonna say my job for the Department of Mental Health is to go out into the community. I'm a community worker, so I go out into the community and I bring out the services. I've been going to churches. My colleague Yvette has been going to libraries, and so like you said, we're trying to decrease the stigma by going out ourselves and letting the community know what kinds of services Department of Mental Health is offering. Again, we are not immigration experts. We have links, so we will link families. I myself do presentations in Spanish for the church community, church members, and I also let them know. And
And it's interesting how I recently went to Venice and I did a presentation. Being there and asking them if they knew anyone who needed mental health services, no one raised their hand. And I said, have you heard of someone in your family before needing mental health services? And no one raised their hand. When I went back to the office, about maybe a couple days or a week, I got phone calls because, again, like you said, people are afraid. They're even afraid to attend these kind of workshops because they think it could be a plan to catch them there, or but that we don't provide any information. Everything's kept confidential. Everything's confidential, and we provide the information, what kind of services we offer, and we leave our business cards, so if they don't want to speak up in public, they can call us. And so what we do, we link to what we call service full service partnership navigators, and we work with different agencies. Now those agencies will provide them with more information on immigration or housing, and we let them know they don't need any no documents. They don't need medical, because we will do the linkage. So that's what we do. Yvette, is there anything I missed?
Hello, how you doing? My name is Clyde Gillette. I'd like to talk about, in regards to each issues that is being dealt with and the urgency to get the awareness. And I know that your agencies now, there are a lot of grassroots organizations that already exist in the community that need the springboard supports of other organizations such as yours to give them validation. And volunteerism is a big, big part, and I want to see if you can address that, because that volunteerism gives more information for the person who volunteers, who is now a spokesperson to the illegal immigrant who is troubled by something. There's other ways to be able to get that information through the form of volunteerism and friendship. But it's still been the biggest form of information gathering at this particular form now. I'd like to address that type of community relation between your organization and the plights that you're on. How do you motivate now those people who are legal to help those who are illegal? And
Yvette, since you're outreach, I'm putting that on.
Again, it's a linkage of service. So with that, as Rosie shared, we have service navigators, and we also have an access number. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I will make sure you all can get that number, or when we meet back again, I'll provide the 800 number. You can call that number and say, this is what I'm looking for. They can route you to what you need. We do work a lot with the libraries. The libraries have a lot of different programs that's going on. Also, when the young lady here was sharing about her sons and the direction we want our kids to go, I would say mentorship in general is just a lot out there. And we do, if you attend, and I will encourage you, whatever area you live in, to learn about your SAC. That's the Service Area Advisory Committee. Find out about that. LA County is divided up in 8 different committees. And with that, you find out a lot about what's out there. You can get on an email list, and you'll hear about all the great things. They have something that's called Sister to Sister. They have special things for Latinas. They have a bunch of different resources, but it's just being a partnership, it's being a partnership with agencies so that you can hear about things. All I could say is get involved with your community, wherever it is. I was honored last year to be able to be a part of this, and I believe it was people from up north. That's not LA County, but I promise you they have something in their county that's doing similar things.
This last thing, I am also a member of the LAPD Clergy Council, which is the organization that's first respondents that reach the community when these conditions and concerns happen, to give them immediate response and service providing, the type of thing that you mentioned. One of the great things is to offer to go to your community and find the reputable place in the community, such as the LAPD Clergy Council, because of their annual meetings that they have all the resources that you spoke about and all the mental resources that this young lady spoke about, and they provide that. We have the challenge to bring the people to the location to get the information, and we kind of springboarded on them through our national night out events, where we've used the forum now to be booth recipients, so people have an opportunity to sidebar and come and get the information. So I want to thank you again for your dedication as well, and just share that with the audience. So please look towards those community organizations, as you said, for best more resources that you can be able to facilitate your needs. Thank you.
Can I add something else, important information? So LA County, the website, if you go to LA County, they have free trainings for the community. And one of them that's very important for anyone, it's called Mental Health First Aid. It's like the basic, knowing the basic, what to do when you encounter someone that is going through a mental health crisis. And again, you go to their website, go to trainings, and you go to the ones that are open to the community, and they're free for you. Department of Mental Health offers them for free.
Okay, well, question.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now? Okay. Check, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the question I have actually a statement in the question. I deal, for the last 2 years, I traveled Europe and the Middle East, and I work with Syrian refugees. We have 11 million Syrians have lost their homes, and outside their country is about 8 million. My focus now at this moment is in Lebanon, where we have 2.5 million Syrian refugees. 70% are under the age of 18, and only 17% of these children are actually receiving education. So our focus, what we do is, it's just interesting because I've never thought the Syrian people will ever be like in this sort of diaspora or exodus. And the question is, not a question, the statement is, we try to focus on the children, try to get them into more education and empowering women by vocational training. And the question I have for the ones who are the lucky ones, the one with the golden tickets that arrived to this country, we have about 25,000, roughly around 25 Syrian refugees settled nationwide, settled in this country. IRC is the organization that brings them here, and unfortunately after 6 months, they are pretty much on their own. 3 months, but you know, right. Okay, we'll share the mic. The question I have for other communities, other nationalities, other indigenous population to this world, okay? This is a very unfamiliar territory for most of Syrians. The question is what is the experience? What do we need to do? Because a lot of the ones that arrive here have mental issues. We're speaking about mental issues, traumatized from the war, from the children to the adults. The children can adapt very quickly, but what about the adults? What about the women? How do we overcome like that? We deal with a lot of psychological issues with the new arrival from traumatized from the war. We also deal with the level of independence. Like we have only 2 families, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 families in LA County. We have a total of 1,200 in San Diego. And then we have, not families, but total number. And in Fresno, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 175 in California. And they're really having issues. We don't know we don't have enough information to share with them. One of the biggest thing is psychological. And the second thing is sort of creating this independence. They are on welfare. These people had their own homes, they had their life, and they are living on welfare, which is very unusual for them. Any advice, anything from other communities, what to do, what to give them an advice? We're both actually, we're Syrian and Palestinian. So the question is like, because we are very involved in the people who are arriving to this country and what services are, what we should look for, right? Like, with what we can possibly, like, of course.
Especially since they're new communities. There are a lot of, possibly a lot of refugees from across the world. However, Syrian, not even a large Syrian immigration or immigrants are in this community, and now they're coming. They're not coming only as an immigrant; they're coming as refugee status with very little English, with a lot of mental issues or like trauma, and with very little support because there's not a large community.
Right, and also we don't have a lot of services available for them. And that's the biggest issue that we're facing at this moment. From your experience, from your own population, and knowing Los Angeles, unfortunately, they're not even in Los Angeles. They're all over the country. We have Cleveland, we have Michigan, Texas, Nevada. We're all experiencing the same issues.
I'll let Ron go first, and then I'll follow up with a few things. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that really help, and it is hard to really make a comparison because of what I'm hearing is that the Syrian community is spread out all over the United States. But what has worked for Guatemalans here, it has been unity, come together as a community. The leaders will usually organize and have a group of people from this community in Guatemala, another community in Guatemala come over here. So all together they have a smaller segments of Guatemalans that once a year come together as fraternities, and they bring the issues to the table. They discuss economics, politics, health, even reacculturating their kids into the Guatemalan culture. Now, it would be really, I think it's a challenge. If you alone, I mean, I think you're doing something that is bigger than ourselves. So I think finding the leaders in the Syrian community, those are the ones you want to target and start organizing, clusters all over and then bring them together to organize and do things. That's the problem.
And then San Diego has 1,000. In San Diego, we had some help, and we organized like support for them. But my question is, how do you have to understand they're traumatized, man. Okay, these people have lost members of their families. So I mean, we went to Fresno. I went to Fresno. We showed a film over there to get the community involved. But I can recognize when somebody has lost his son, or lost their father, or lost their brother. So it's really hard. Even within that, it's just so hard to find a leader. We do that in Lebanon, by the way. In Lebanon, because it's a larger community, we have 800,000 vulnerable Syrian refugees living in camps. So each camp, we have one particular person that we identify and we go through. But in the States, it's so... what about mental issue? Is there any organization that actually offers?
Yeah, sure. You could go ahead.
My husband and I, Bilal Morris, we're Muslims and, living in America. And one of the things that for all immigrant communities is that you use the faith, right? Faith-based groups. For the Garifuna culture, it's a Catholic church. A lot of community organizing has to happen with the faith-based groups. We go to our mosque every Friday for Juma. There's never, ever one presentation from anyone about what's happening with the Muslim world. So start going to the mosque. Start educating the people. People will pull dollars out if it's a monetary issue. In addition to fundraising, you will also be able to identify multidisciplinary teams who will be willing to volunteer and go out. Myself, I'm a social worker. I have a master's degree in social work. I'm a mental health expert. And I'm looking for opportunities such as this to volunteer. So you have to start going to the mosque. we can make an assumption that the majority of these refugees coming into the countries are Muslims. And so that's where you start. That's what I would recommend.
I just have a statement and a question. The statement is, for 2 years, I've hit every door, mosques, synagogue, churches. Yes, so I've been doing this for 2 years now. But the Syrian community, in 2015, we received only 900 total. 900 Syrians arrived to this country in 2015, so my focus was overseas. In 2016, please correct me if I'm wrong, we got the bulk. And in 2016, with the new administration, they basically canceled all new immigrants coming from Syria. But we've reached everybody. The problem is, like, let's say, for example, and I'm being honest with you about faith group, especially, no offense to any faith group whatsoever. In the Muslim community, we have issues between the Shia and the Sunni. Okay, and it's a really big deal for us because most of the people coming from Syria are Sunni. And most of the mosques, a lot of the well-funded mosques, I'm just saying for me, from my experience, are Shia. Like in Fresno, we have 2 mosques, both. And when they helped the community, it turned out to be really not a good thing, not a good chemistry between the two. So what we did in Fresno is we actually went through a mixed interfaith group, and they were from all faiths. So that really was helpful for us. But again, I'm just asking the question about what can we do to provide mental support? Because I think if we could do that, just sort of trauma, we can get them out of that and then find the leader, like you said, leaders, I should say. But is there any recommendation specifically for, I'll put the mic down, sorry.
No, it's okay. So I'm going to touch a little bit on everything, and hopefully my end part will answer the question. It's wonderful. When I heard you say interfaith, I was thinking that as she was speaking on spirituality, because here in LA County, we're very big on we cannot do it alone providing mental health services. That spirituality helps. It helps because whatever the person practice, it helps them decrease their anxiety and other things that's going on. And the churches, synagogues, religious centers, they wrap around the family and give them hope. And we're big about creating hope that leads to mental health wellness. And now we're mixing everything together, whether it's physical, mental, substance abuse. We're coming together to treat everything as a whole so that everyone can have that whole person healing. Now, I have heard you mention trauma a couple of times. With that, whatever county you're in, call and find out what they offer. We have the full service partnership, which within that program, they link to services. Let's say you're homeless. They're going to try to find you housing because you have mental illness. That's the best that right now we can do is just say, connect with the Department of Mental Health and see what's out there. There are things out there, but people cannot be afraid to get assessed. Some people use the words, I'm not crazy. We know people are not crazy, but these are the terms that people, when they come to us, that they use them. We say, no, we know you're not crazy. Everybody experience something emotionally. That's a natural part of life, whether it's death, graduating from high school. It's just a natural part of life to have these emotions, but sometimes people just say, no, I don't need the help. So encourage all of your community members, whoever you work with, to let them know, call Department of Mental Health. And, I'm sure it's something out there. I would like to provide Rosie an iPhone number, because if you call us and say, I'm looking for something, we can look into it and try to get you the information. So our phone number is 310-482-6600. Sorry about that. This is our main line. Area code 310-482-6600. Okay, Rosie and I could be reached at, Yvette is 310-482 310-482 6615. And then Rosie is 310-482-6619. Okay, we're okay with the numbers? For Rosie is 199. And get in touch with the, we're LA County, West LA. So we're considered right here Service Area 5. But there's different areas. Glendale's within LA County, but that's not us. That's Service Area 2. So if you call us, we will route you to our specific area, not ours, but the specific area. You could give us a zip code and we could look up and tell you exactly who's doing what. Well, for LA County, we could speak to, but we could take the time, if this is a concern, to find out who could lead you to what in whatever area. Okay? Thank you.
And just very, very briefly, so over the summer, I was able to be part of an internship. It's actually an internship specifically geared for undocumented immigrant youth folks. I don't fit none of that youth folk stuff, but I was able to meet a young lady that does work specifically for refugee folks because she's a refugee herself. So her work is specifically geared for refugee people. Her organization is TIYYA. Let me, by the end of today, I will either contact her personally or find a way to connect her with you all, because that is her work, and her work is out of the Inland Empire. So I'll definitely make sure I connect with you on that.
So, like I said, the nonprofit organization is called Lighthouse Peace Initiative. It's specifically for overseas, but we also do some local support here for some of the refugees that we can help. Please get the card, and I'm not here a lot, but Sabine is, and that will be amazing if we can get more information and contact. Yeah.
Question?
Yes, I had actually one comment and two questions. And one of them, the questions go back to the issue of health service access. And can any of you explain for the audience and listeners what emergency medical does for low-income people and undocumented immigrants, as well as the recently signed law by Governor Brown of SB 75, which extended medical services fully to fully cover all undocumented children under 19 years of age, and how can families utilize those resources to have access to mental health services? And the third, and this is just a comment, is as part of this festival, there's a short called Children of Becca that deals with the issue of children in war. So I encourage everyone to check it out. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, could Yvette, you want to respond to that?
Just real quick, it's right after this panel.
Okay, kind of state the question again, and I'm going to see if I can answer it.
Emergency medical works for undocumented immigrants, and second, how can families utilize, have access to mental health services through SB 75, which is the state law that Governor Brown signed recently that expanded medical to fully cover undocumented children under the age of 19.
Emergency medical works the same. Again, once you actually get enrolled in the process and moving forward, then it's helped to make it become permanent medical. So services should not, you should not receive services because it's emergency medical. At least I have not heard of any extra barriers within that.
So I want to be provocative as a moderator. I want to provoke and create some problems. And working on reflection of the Garifuna experience, right? The Garifuna experience has been after we were displaced in St. Vincent, and there were the Spanish and the French who fought with us to take away the land, and then the French and Spanish, and then the last was the English. So we found ourselves eventually in Central America, trying to find a way out. So much so that we ended in Honduras under Spanish rule. The Spanish rule with the Catholic Church. What I call, what I would dare to say, was a form of confinement, right? And so when you pose the problem, when you pose the question, what should be done with the Syrian who are displaced by war, traumatized by war, and then the solution, not the solution, but the suggestion to go into the mosque. And I was trying to make the analogy with the Garifuna displaced by the British, with perhaps anglicized church, right, quote unquote, and now with the Spanish Catholic Church, quote unquote, and being the provocateurs of our existence, right? So it seems to me that living in this modern time, after going through the experiences of Holocaust, extermination by other races of our cultures, right? We have the experience in Mexico, we have the slavery experience, we have the Jewish experience, where there's always seeming to be some provocateurs of our space. And I'm not too sure what the solution is in terms of, I know, Steve, you deal in psychiatry and psychology for mass groups. It seems to me like religion might have some space, but not all the space for us to continue, right? What is the solution for mental? It seems like we have to have a critical space that moves us out of what is being provided at the present. And a new form of leadership that is visionary, that perhaps is not so much tied into some religious, but perhaps a sectarian, some kind of sectarian space that doesn't compromise itself.
These are all really, really big issues and problems that you're raising about immigration, about people being forced out of their homes on all different levels, from all of our conversations, and the crisis that you're talking about is certainly of huge proportion. And I think one of the ways that we get stuck is we can get overwhelmed by what needs to be done and where do you begin, and okay, we address this, but then we still have the issue of all these additional refugees coming in. Let me just make a few comments about I'm a psychologist and a professor at UCLA, and one of the areas of my focus is on resilience, and about how the brain functions. And one of the things that I think is an issue for for this conversation is, and particularly about our children, is a sense of danger that we are all placed in, whether it's not knowing whether we can walk outside or go and play in the park without a danger, being faced with the danger of being found out, whether it's Syrians being forced to leave their home because, there's a fear of death. One of the things that happens with fear is that it changes how the brain functions. And it changes in very important ways how the brain functions. We have different levels of our brain, and through the evolutionary process, we've developed more and more complex layers and functioning of the brain to where we have this top level cortex and prefrontal cortex, which has all of our creative thinking, all of our problem solving abilities. And then below that is the emotional brain, and below that is the most primitive or survival part of our brain. And one of the things that happens with danger, and that's really however we want to frame it, we're talking about different aspects of danger here. One of the things that happens is that the brain shifts to lower, more primitive levels of functioning. So children brought up in this environment, in this climate, they go into this danger, fearful type of state, and it interrupts development. It interrupts mental and emotional development. And so that's on the very basic of levels, because whatever current hardship, current problems we're talking about, ultimately we want to know what's important for healthy development. We want to know what's important so that when the crisis, whatever it is over, we're functioning okay. And what we're talking about is conditions under which that doesn't happen. Okay, so that's the first thing I think is so important to talk about, is that all of these kinds of dangerous situations, fear of ice, fear of being exposed, fear of not having enough to eat, result in an interruption of normal development of the brain, and that's so important. When we talk about how do we deal with all of these situations, one of the things that I do is I separate out the problem from our reaction to the problem. And most of the time, these are linked together. Okay? So there's a problem, and we have a stress reaction because danger creates the stress reaction. And the stress reaction actually interferes with our optimal functioning. So the first thing you want to do, whatever the problem is, you want to see if you can help the individual kind of self-regulate. What I mean is, if I'm emotionally upset, to have a way of calming myself down, to have a way of finding my own center of gravity, finding my own place that I can come to rest. So if you're in a boat that capsizes in the middle of the ocean, and that's the ultimate danger, if a little log comes along and you can hold on to the log, well, you still have all the big dangers to deal with, but simply having that log is some respite to now at least I don't have to struggle to stay up, keep my head above water. So in a general sense, you want to identify the logs. You want to identify anything that helps you self-regulate, that helps you feel okay, even if it's in the moment, even if it's not solving the whole big problem. And so, for example, in what you're talking about, or what we're all talking about, is, so one thing would be, and you've mentioned it by going to the mosque, one of it would be, how do we create any sense of safety? It's not overall safety, but just safety for this evening, safety for today, safety for this week, whatever that might be. So for example, finding a small community, and I realize you're dealing with people spread around, but then you may need to use the internet to create a meta community where people know Tuesday at 3 o'clock, you hook into this network where people can talk and share. Some people will be able to express their fears. Other people will be able to give suggestions. So there's no big answer, but there are these small little answers that have you actually feel like you're making progress in some way. And that sense of progress facilitates a sense of resilience. So it's a step by. I published a book on resilience, and I call it The Path, Mastering the 9 Pillars of Resilience and Success. And the whole idea there is people feel overwhelmed by all of what their situation is. Again, whether it's an immigrant here who's worried about being found out, or whether it's a group fighting for their survival. And the idea behind the path is, okay, what does it take to get onto the path? Okay, I'm not at the destination, but if I do something and I know when I get on the path, I know I'm on the path, that's a relief, because that's telling me I'm going in the right direction at least. So, and more specifically for you, I could probably link you to some organizations or give you the names of some organizations that could be of service to your groups. We could talk later. But I know I'm connected to some trauma-related organizations that specifically, they've gone to China after one of the earthquakes and the tsunami and things like that. So there are some organizations around that could be of service.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a question. You want? Go ahead.
The 10 tips for stress. Do you have a copy with you? Well, we don't have it in here with us, but out there's a flyer that has 10 stress relief. So I know a couple off of the top of my head. One is find someone to talk to. Another could be to create in the moment. Maybe that person can take a walk. Maybe in the moment finding them a self-help book, something that they could refer to. But please, when you get a chance, get that flyer. You know, what works for me may not work for someone else. So what works for you all may not work for me. So we have to remember that, but it's something, as Dr. Stephen said, knowing that there's help out there, there's ideas out there, you just have to find out what works for that person.
I just want to go back to you, the gentleman there, about religion, just a question.
Yeah.
And about also the ideology of finding people who are non-secular. Secular. Because for me, I think the issue of what we're having specifically right now is very related to religion and ideology, pretty much in many different places. And my question is, you asked a question to be provocative about one specific thing. Why bring him to one faith or different faith? I just think it's time for us, maybe, okay, to go beyond that. Like what I do, where I'm part of maybe 300, 400 international volunteers that we specifically focus on Lebanon right now, okay, and we do everything we need to do. Most of us are from Europe and America, some from Asian countries, and some from South America, very, very few from South America. And it's very interesting for me how the dynamic is changing. Okay, we as an international volunteers who predominantly are not Muslim, we are going to and help the Sunni community in Syrian Sunni community in Lebanon. It really is changing their perspective of who we are. Doesn't matter what religion we are, okay? And vice versa, by the way. Okay, so yes, I agree with you. If we can focus on that and focus only on humanitarian work, I think it's an amazing perspective. I really appreciate that. I think that's what I got from you. That's what you were saying, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Challenging us to go outside the religion and think about more as a humanitarian?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I wanted to follow. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
When I made my comment about reaching out to what is already, to the support that is already there, I'm not necessarily saying that the faith is the answer to to that, but one of the challenges also as a Muslim of color is that we also find that many of the Arab cultures kind of lock us out, you know, when it comes to reaching out to us for help. And we are dying to serve and be a part of the solution. And so for me, it's a struggle to hear, you know, I understand what you're saying, to be as non-sectarian as possible. And as a Muslim, I view myself as a humanitarian. But I also feel that, you know, I would also be in a good position to help my brothers and sisters, you know? And I feel I know a lot of Muslim professionals who are also willing to help. And I feel that what we have to offer is not being tapped into. And I think that's a shame.
I totally agree with you, and I'm going to give you my card, okay, right now. And please share what I do with your community, because we do need help.
Yeah, my brother, I just want to also, in terms of addressing that, it's not only about secular or orthodox or whatever it is. I think Dr. Sidorov brought up a very important thing in terms of you have to try to create intervention programs. You in the Syrian community, being that you're non-Muslim or not, non-Muslim Christian, this is what we are doing. I am a gang intervention specialist trained by LA Unified School District in terms of intervening in trauma and things like that in terms of gangs. I worked in one of the most gang-infested neighborhoods, Jordan Downs, Jordan High School. And I did not understand how to deal with young people, how to teach young people that were in gangs. Until one young man walked into my classroom and said, "Do you know all of them that you have in here is in a gang?" And he said, "You need to come to my gang intervention workshops." And I thought that I was a trained educator. I don't need that. But I had to do that. And I learned, yes, I was glad I went. I think that what we are doing in Belize, my film is dealing with the gang crisis and the trauma that it has in Belize. The whole Crips and the Bloods warfare, that it has reached civil war proportions. What have we done? And Brother Eugenio had mentioned, and I wanted to respond to the question, that we have created in Belize since 2013 in addressing the problem of trauma and children that is created that was traumatized by the problem with the gangs in Belize City, and it has spread into the cultural capital of Dangriga. And it has spread further than that. It has spread into Punta Gorda. I was part of a gang intervention crew of educators in Belize that in 2013, where I was able to shoot my film, to follow this gang intervention social worker named Abdul Marin Yunus. And we teamed up, myself from South Central Los Angeles, as an educator, and we didn't know how to address this, just like you don't know how to really, you're finding that going to the Muslim community, there are Shia and difference between that. Yes, but there is that space that you can create. What we did in Belize, we created our own gang intervention program. And we did a tour in the South. What we found out that the crisis was spreading into the South, coming from Belize City, where it was at a civil war proportion. So we created our own gang intervention program by my taking strategies from South Central to them, to the educators there. And our program now is about 4 or 5 years old. And we has helped curb the spread of it into the South. When we got into the South, we found out that it was already there. We gave talks with the students, with the educators. And we found out that none of these educators in the schools, in Toledo Community College, in the primary schools, they were not trained to address the problem. And so we asked them if they know that these children are traumatized and that the problem is there. They said, "We know, but we don't know how to address it." We don't know how to intervene. And how do we know? We asked the kids. We said, what is the color of the People's United Party? They said blue. It's a party that represents blue. We said, what is the color of the United Democratic Party? They said red. And Abdul Marin Yunus, who you would see in my film, he's the one that is doing this. He's a trained social worker, a trained gang intervention specialist, but we are trying to find if these children have been traumatized. And he said, what gang does the PUP belongs to? They said, the Crips. What gang does the UDP belong to? They said, Bloods. These children already know. They are already traumatized by it. And so we realized it is here. You don't know how to deal with it, but the thing is that I think that your community, being that you're Muslim or Christian or secular, will have to develop your own model that take from these people who are that can help. Like the sister here says, minds might not work for you, but you have to find that module that will work in terms of addressing the plight of Syrian refugees, being whatever faith they come from, Christian, Muslim, or secular. That a module that you can create that will borrow from all these different departments in the United States in terms of what Dr. Sidoroff is saying. Find that understanding in terms of how you can address trauma, which is your main thing, trauma. The trauma that war has had on these refugees. And it has to come from an anthropological standpoint. Her work inside the mental health institution, particularly working with African Americans and Latinos, may not necessarily apply to Syrians. And I guess Dr. Sidoroff can correct me, but I think that every anthropology has a different kinds of psychiatry. Is that right? That is applicable to that specific kind of case. So I believe that from what I'm hearing generally, and I was able to listen for a long time, and in terms of what my wife was saying as a social worker, being that she has worked with a lot of trauma in her field, that I feel that you will have to begin to start to develop your own intervention program that will come from your organizations that understands the anthropology of your people, being whoever they are, with their religious backgrounds, wherever they are. I think that, for me, from what I'm hearing, is really the key there. And I'm saying that as a solution because that's what we are doing in terms of addressing the gang crisis that is terrorizing Belize, that is having a significant trauma. Yes, children, as Dr. Sidoroff says, the children in Belize they don't want to learn because they're seeing so many images of violence in the city. These gangs, if you see my film, it has a map to show you how close the turfs of the Crips and the Bloods are. It's a small little city. And they're just beside. These young men they're so close. So can you imagine a little population of 60,000 people, predominantly black people, that are, it's at a civil war proportion. It's like having a civil war. They are child soldiers. And so we had to come up with a module. Me and the other gang intervention educators who were trained in this, both in Belize and here, to find a way how we can address that problem. And I think it's very similar to what you are trying to do. My film, Abdul Marin Yunus and the Belize gang crisis, is addressing that. You will see him at work and how we are going about trying to, we created out of our own. The government didn't give no help. The Ministry of Education in Belize they don't care. The politicians don't care, right? But it is a transnational thing. But so what we do, we have taken ideas both from the United States and from Belize, and we merge them together in terms of trying to create something that may be able to work and help maybe stop the next generation from being obliterated by this crisis.
Can I have just a question for the gentleman real quick? Is there a specific information, because we have about 200,000 teenagers, most of them dealt with the drama of the war, but now they're living with no education and they're living in sort of like camps, like, I don't know if you've seen it, but they're like temporary camps built out of tarp and wood and stuff, and they're really like very, very, there's not a lot for them to do, except slave labor, pretty much. Is there specific research or anything you have done in your community that possibly could be a pilot, like to understand how to deal? Because let me say this, all the international organization, UNHCR, ICRC, every organization is on the ground, but they're not dealing with the teenagers. And I see them when I work with them, I see how angry they are. They have zero future, zero. And nobody's going back to Syria. I would say 15, 20 years from now, when we're sitting there having the same conversation, I would say maybe 20% will be able to go back to Syria, but still 500,000 or 1 million still living in Lebanon in these camps. My question to you, is there guidelines that you have discovered or any research has been done specifically about because we don't have gangs in the area, we end up having ISIS or Daesh or Hezbollah or something like a group that would claim these children. The question is, is there studies that you have done that you could share? Okay.
I will share with you after. I will share with you.
Study. It's just like if there's a write-up or anything, like things from any group, like something we could take back from your community, at least some sort of a guideline.
So my provocative, right, statement earlier was just so as to get us thinking, just to think critically, because I do see the relevance, right, of religious organizations. I look at the existence as good in themselves, right, as providing some kind of moral platform from which to move on. But I deliberately made that statement so as to move us forward from that position to the good, right? And and so my challenge, because I'm an educator, right? And when I see my students, I give them statements to critically analyze and give me back something that I could work with. And if I'm not able to work with it, then I say I'm not satisfied, right? So it seems to me what if I use the Syrian as the Syrian problem, right, which is emblematic to what happened to other societies, why we have economic migrants, right? Why we have refugees, migrants from war, and all these are indicative of a cause, right? And so we have a cause and an effect. And perhaps the county Department of Mental Health eventually might have something to give us if perhaps we do a study collectively, all of us here, because I'm not too certain if you have experienced war, displacing millions of people, and what that does to the brain. And so where I'm going with this is that I wanted to go back to Dr. Stevens when he suggested we could use the internet, because in the Garifuna community, we are trying to locate the concept of a nation, because we were displaced and we are all scattered. And the idea of a nation, the Garifuna nation, has not been addressed. So we are using the internet as a forum. Now I have a problem with the internet because it's not. I don't see anybody, but I hear voices, and I hear solutions. I hear the problems, and it goes. And I think about the statement that somebody had said, like one person might know some of the problem, and one problem might find the solution, but that many people will provide several problems, but many people can find all the solutions. I'm not too certain if it works out that way, but I think the internet as a forum, people calling in and having that dialogue across borders might be one way for you to sieve through potential leadership, to move on to another level.
I'm very acquainted with, there's a large Lebanese community in Belize. And it was privy to me that since the Syrian war, a large amount of them has flee into Central America. As you know, the Iranian ambassador of Mexico, who I knew very personally, provides millions of dollars in helping not only Muslim communities in Central America. His office is in Mexico, but he also comes to Belize, and he provides monies to help the Muslim school in Belize. That school is predominantly 1% Muslim, and all the rest is Christians. But yet he did not say, well, I do not want this money to go because they are not Muslims. This is for everything. And he has provided that service, as well as the Lebanese community in Belize, both Muslim and non-Muslim. Mostly business people have provided service, funding, monies to help alleviate that crisis that is unfolding right now. And so if you ask if they had some kind of specific organization, no. They are just people who, whenever you see community life, they have provided that. So I went beyond the shores of America, and I'm going into Central America, where there's a large Lebanese community. The mosque, I see you talk about the problem of Shia and Muslim and Sunni. In Belize, the mosque there accept every Muslim. From Sufi go everything. Here you find in the United States there are mosques who wants to discriminate against a Shia and stuff like that. But I'm specifically talking about the fact that these are people in Belize that has created help groups in terms of that refugee crisis. But the Iranian ambassador at his work is very instrumental in providing financial resources to make sure that these small groups, and there are many of them, as Brother Hinyo is saying, you could have many different groups, but they come in and they provide that various help. I think the same thing can happen in terms of you in reaching out to the Iranian government in terms of providing. I know it's in the United States and that might be a problem, but at the same time, you need funding.
Iran is
you need funding. For what you want to do, you need funding, right?
No, but Iran is on the wrong side of the war.
Yes.
I just want to say. They're part of the, unfortunately, the Iranian government is financing the genocide. No politics. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, it's very difficult but I appreciate that. Like, we will reach out for different people outside the U.S. I appreciate that.
I'm going to say something just for a hot minute. So just to follow what Mr. Eugenio suggested. So as black folks in America, right? So part of the narrative that's out there about being undocumented is that people from the diaspora are not undocumented. So one of the way that I really jumped into the work that I'm in, I think outside of kind of for all intents and purposes being forced into it, which is not a bad thing in my case, right? I came out about my material need, and out of that, somewhere I had a paradigm shift that me being undocumented it's a lot bigger problem. So what ended up happening was, of course, intellectually, I know that there are black undocumented people around, but how do I find my people? So what led up to the creation of the Undocu Black Network is that we were all looking for each other. So a group of young folks decided to have a meetup in Miami. And the way that we did it, because of being undocumented, it was top secret. I actually hopped on a plane to go meet a bunch of strangers. And so out of that, it was just wanting to connect, wanting to have our own space as black folks that are undocumented. And from that, that's how the Undocu Black Network was created. But every single month we have a blog, we have a we call it the Undocu Black Gossip Rag, and every single month we actually have a community call-in. We've also been able to create little pockets. So there were 65 black undocumented folks in this space from so many different parts of the world, actually. And so, like with me, I'm actually one of the lead organizers for the UBN network out here in LA. And so I just try to connect with the LA folks. I know that there's folks in New York that they're connected. So for us, we just created our own space to be able to check in with each other. And yeah, once a month, every single month, we have a community call just to check in with each other. So I don't know if that would be a solution in terms of with you trying to connect your people and having folks find their folks.
Thank you, Ms. Lambe. So I also wanted to maybe mention this. I see that as a challenge. The refugees from war, I would take an interest in see how that plays out in terms of trying to give these 100,000, 200,000 young people a way out by providing a course in critical thinking, right? I could help you maybe design a syllabus and also come up with some kind of leadership program because when I was growing up, this was provided for me when I was young, leadership training, and I would want to contribute something along that line. And I had something else to say, but I'll pass it on to Stephen.
I think the direction that the comments are going are really very important and very helpful because, as I mentioned earlier, if you separate the problem from how we react to the problem and we focus on how we react, when you think of all of these teenagers, when you think of all of the people in these camps, refugee camps, every one of those people has energy. And that energy, we could say, is being blocked. There's no place for it to go, and so we have all kinds of problems as a result. If instead of having the focus on what's a solution, but instead, how do we create a context in which we challenge these people that have a lot of time and no resources, but how do we challenge them simply to engage in a process? Then we're moving in a direction. And who knows what that can result in. But it turns something that's where there's a blockage of energy into something that's more constructive. And there you start to have possibilities. And so I think it's a little bit of a shift in framing the problem, a little bit of a shift in framing what the issue is. From how do we deal with all of these people that are stuck in camps or stuck in communities and feeling the trauma, to, okay, how do we help these people create a context, a forum, and some ideas have been suggested in which we can start constructively engaging this energy. And that's the goal. And from there, who knows what can happen. I want to say that we still have about 15, 20 minutes left in our panel and discussion, but I was just informed that in terms of the radio broadcasting of our presentation,